Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back again. Another first round playoff preview series. We're going to be talking about the Colorado Avalanche and the Seattle Kraken on this one. This is a story of two teams in very different positions in their NHL career. The Avalanche coming off defending the defending Stanley Cup champions, and the Kraken coming into the playoffs for the very first time in franchise history. And to join us on this preview, we've got two Hockey Raiders contributors, Kerry Collins, who covers the Avalanche, and Adam Kierszenblat, who covers the Seattle Kraken. I'll start with Kerry. Kerry, how are you doing here?
Pretty good. How are you guys?
Really good. Looking forward to this series because the narratives around these two teams are so different but it's interesting because I think it's kind of maybe way closer than a lot of people think it's going to be. You know, the Avalanche coming off the Stanley Cup are not necessarily as prone to repeat this year as maybe some might have thought coming into the season. So I think it'll be interesting. Adam, from a Seattle Kraken perspective, we're going to talk a lot about the team, but how are you doing heading into this first round series? You feeling confident about your team?
There's definitely confidence to be around the Seattle Kraken right now, 100-point season, and just the way that they played Colorado, which we'll talk about this in a little bit overall this year. I think there is some confidence on the Kraken side. And even though they've kind of struggled down the stretch a little bit, you can't deny that the atmosphere in Seattle is going to be absolutely incredible. So that should give them a pretty good boost in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, playoff hockey is a totally different animal, right? And it'll be the first time the Kraken as a franchise have experienced it. You brought it up. Let's talk about it real quick before we get into some questions here. The series between these two teams has actually been really quite even. The Kraken are 2-0-1, so they did pull out two victories against the Avs. The Avs won 1-1. All games were separated by only a goal. So these two teams were quite close in terms of the scoring. For Seattle, they're the most improved expansion team in NHL history. They jumped to 40 points from the year prior to this season. So they really, I mean, to me, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, everything else at this point is gravy. I mean, Seattle is way ahead of probably where they expected to be, but they've earned it. They've gotten there on their depth and that sort of scoring, whereas Colorado's got a lot of elite talent, high-end scorers, and they're going to rely on those folks to do that. Strong offense on both sides, but it's the heavy hitters for the Avs versus the depths of the Kraken. So, Kerry, I'll start with you.
Sure.
What have you seen from the Avalanche this season so far? Are you excited about the playoffs? Do you think that they've got another shot of going deep as they did last year? Maybe not as far. Who knows? Where do you see the Avalanche going in this series?
This is such a weird season for them. I mean, going into the season, it was, they're coming off winning the Stanley Cup. They signed Nathan MacKinnon to that long extension, all that. Everybody was all excited. And then even as recent as January, if they were on the bubble of whether or not they were even going to really make the playoffs. And then they kind of got a few more pieces back. The injuries started to sort of go away. And then, they've been on kind of a tear lately. So it's just they are hot going into the postseason. But can they go as far? It's just so tough because this team's essentially the same. No Gabriel Landeskog, though, in the playoffs is a massive, massive thing. But they've been winning without him here for the last month or so. So, can they repeat? Yeah, it's like the hardest thing to do. I don't know if they will, but they do still have a lot of really good pieces. And I do think that, they've got the things there to make a pretty good run. And it's just a matter of, Makar hasn't played. What's he going to be like when he gets back? He hasn't played recently, that much recently, but it's just kind of, it's all, will the planets align again? Because it just seemed like last season they just rolled through, they swept through Nashville. And then, it was just kind of, the steamroller from there. So can they repeat? Yeah, I think they've got the talent to do it. They did not do very well against the East. So it'll be interesting to see if they make it that far, who they run into. But it's just, they got to get through the West first. And I just think there's a lot of teams that stack up pretty well against them. And one of them we already mentioned, is the Kraken. I think 3 close games. All of them were 1-goal games. And that was a team that held down those super studs of Colorado every time they played them. I think between like McKinnon and Rantanen combined, I think had 1 point against them in the 3 games this year.
Yeah.
So, do they have the pieces? Yeah, there's so many variables, and it'll just be interesting to see if they can keep going what they've done really over the last, month, particularly over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, what I will say too is there's probably more competition in the West than there was last year. I mean, Colorado was clearly the team coming out of the Western Conference last season, and they proved as much. But they've got some stiffer competition coming out of the West this year. You mentioned McKinnon, Rantanen, McKinnon with 111 points, Rantanen with 105. Those were the 2 top guys. And I'm sure we'll talk about them more as things go on. Adam, what about you with the Kraken? What did you see from them this year? I mean, obviously they took a massive jump over last year, kind of been doing things by committee, had a really strong season, led the league in 5-on-5 scoring, and sort of been doing it that way. How do you see this going for them? First time ever in the playoffs. Is it going to be a little too much too soon, kind of like, wow, overwhelmed, or do you think they'll rise to the occasion and really show well here?
Well, one thing about the Kraken is that we have to remember that even though the team has only been around for 2 years, they have that playoff experience in their individual players. Guys like Yanni Gourde, Jane Schwartz, both of them have won Stanley Cups. So there is, while it will be a little bit difficult for the Kraken in maybe those first couple games because they haven't played as a team in the playoffs. They do have that experience going into the playoffs where they have those playoff performers and those players who have stepped up big when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs in the past. The one thing that's interesting about the Seattle Kraken is that they have had injuries. They've stayed relatively healthy as well this year, which has really helped them build this strong team and this strong foundation. Yes, they've lost Oliver Bjorkstrand, and he won't be available until potentially the 3rd round of the playoffs, which is a massive hit, but they've been able to kind of score by committee. You look at guys like Daniel Sprong getting 20 goals. Daniel Sprong was a PTO tryout at the beginning of the year. You look at Matty Beniers taking a step up, Yanni Gourde, Jared McCann becoming a 40-goal scorer. So they can attack you at different ways. And then even Vince Dunn becoming one of the lead offensive defensemen in the NHL. So it's going to be very interesting to see. It all relies on the goaltending. What's going to happen with the goaltending here, because the goaltending has been a little bit suspect this season between Martin Jones and Philip Grubauer. So if the goaltending can hold on and they can limit how many power plays they give up to the Colorado Avalanche, even though they did go perfect against the Colorado Avalanche this season, 6-for-6 on the penalty kill. They also didn't play Colorado at their full strength. Colorado had the injuries that kept coming up, so you didn't really get to see a full Colorado team that you're necessarily going to see in the playoffs when these two teams met. So if they can limit the penalty kill and actually get some power play goals, which has been the main struggle for this team, special teams on both sides, then it should be an exciting series.
Yeah, it's a good breakdown of what it looks like for the Kraken heading into this round. Kerry, I'm going to come back to you and talk specifically about some of the players. We mentioned McKinnon and Rantanen with both over 100 points this season. You talked about Makar coming back, how he's going to play. He had 66 in the games that he was playing, and he's an elite defenseman for sure. JT Compher stepped up. Georgiev's looked good in goal. Who are the players that you're watching? Is it the Stars? Is it somebody else on the Avalanche that you're kind of thinking needs to be a major factor here in the series? Are there players that you're watching specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to ignore those top 2 guys. I mean, when they score 100 points and, they've kind of, Rantanen in particular, I mean, he just has had this stretch of games since the beginning of the year where he almost never goes back-to-back games without at least getting a point, and they need that in the playoffs for sure. But everybody's going to be looking at Nathan McKinnon. Everybody's going to be looking at Mikko Rantanen. And they sort of struggled, like I mentioned, against Seattle, earlier this year. But one guy, and people are going to be looking at Makar too, Conn Smythe, everything last year, things like that. Devin Taves is a guy that just continues to fly under the radar for them. And I mean, he is a big part. If Makar isn't in for his usual 30 minutes a night, Taves is going to be the guy kind of running the show on that power play too. He's the guy that they put back there, and he's been really really good this year. I think that's definitely a guy to watch. I think these are going to be close games again. Just like all of the regular season contests were. I mean, one was a shootout, one was overtime, the other one was a 1-goal game. But guys like Arturi Lehkonen and Evan Rodriguez have been really good this year. And it's those depth guys that always make the difference in these series, it seems like. I mean, I think the one game Colorado won was in a shootout, and they got the goal from Alex Newhook, of like all people. So, I mean, they're going to need the depth guys, but they also just have leaned so heavily on McKinnon and Rantanen this year that, I mean, I think those two have to kind of bust out against these guys, just from a standpoint of, they rely on them so heavily to get them going. And I mean, if Makar comes back, he's got to be the same guy. It's just, the eyes are on those three big names, but maybe for a couple of different reasons, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, if the Avalanche are a team where if those two or three aren't really clicking, there's a problem in Colorado, right? So everything sort of follows those three and their lead.
Yeah, and it's part of the reason why I think they struggled against Seattle this year, is they were able to slow them down. So like when those guys aren't going, you're going to be in for a fight. So they need all of them, I think, especially if they're going to repeat, and especially if they're going to get out of this first round.
Yeah. Adam, you talked a little bit about some of the names that you were watching in Seattle. I'm going to kind of ask you again here who you're focused in on. You talked about McCann having a career year. He wound up with 70 points and things like that. And that's the kind of the buzz about Seattle, is that they seem to be able to roll all four lines. They've got a number of people who produced for them offensively and really contributed to this team's success. Who are you specifically watching in Seattle?
Well, for me, it's all about Philip Grubauer. I think we've come to a point where he's going to be the starter this year in the playoffs. And you look at his numbers against Colorado, he loves playing his former team this year. 3 games, he has a .928 save percentage and a .170 goals against average, stopping 64 of 69 shots. So Philip Grubauer is going to be massive. Like I said, he didn't have the best of seasons, but he seems to really show up for the Seattle Kraken against the Colorado Avalanche. And he was a big reason why they were able to eclipse the 100-point mark this season. But for me, looking at this series, it's going to come down to that third line of Eeli Tolvanen, Yanni Gourde, and Andrei Burakovsky. So they've really put Oliver Bjorkstrand in that spot as well. But I feel like Andrei Burakovsky would really fit well in there. We'll see how they kind of shake out the lines a little bit here, but guys like Eeli Tolvanen, 27 points off 48 games this year with the Kraken, waiver pickup. So the Kraken have all of these guys that were kind of throwaways, or like teams didn't really want them, and they're thriving in Seattle. So you look at a guy, like I mentioned, Jared McCann. How many people would have predicted that Jared McCann would have been a 40-goal scorer when he was playing for the Penguins a couple of years ago, and that he would get traded to Toronto and they still wouldn't protect him and all of that. So guys like McCann, guys like Eeli Tolvanen, guys like Daniel Sprong, they have something to prove here. But for me, the real key is always going to be Adam Larsson, their shutdown defenseman. He had 33 points in 82 games this year, plus 27 at even strength this year. So if he's going to be playing a lot. He's going to probably hit that 30 minute mark, because he's paired with Vince Dunn, and he's going to be in charge of shutting down the McKinnons, the Rantanens, anybody who can score on Colorado. He's going to be out there when they're out there. So if Adam Larsson can continue his strong season defensively, then that's going to go a long way in helping the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. To me, Seattle has somewhat of that vibe that Vegas had in the very first year, when they had a lot of people with chips on their shoulder, and it was kind of like, okay, we've moved on, we're doing our own thing, but we still have something to show here. And Seattle has shown a lot of other players have that. Kerry, switching over a little bit, you talked about the depth of Colorado and what they need to do. Is that what you would call like a key to success for the Avs in this series, or is there something else that you think the Avalanche need to do just to make sure they can continue on and get past this first round?
Yeah, and I mean, it's top heavy as the lineup has been, and that's what we talked about this last year too, going into the playoffs, as top heavy as the lineup has been, the key is always going to be those guys, like I mentioned, like an Evan Rodriguez, and Arturi Lehkonen. Those guys need to step up. They need to get points from somewhere else to be able to knock out a series. Another big key to victory that it was last year, it was last year's playoffs, and then it was all throughout this entire season this year. They have to start hot. Colorado is a team that absolutely has to come out with their hair on fire, or they're in trouble. When you look at just the first periods this year, I mean, they're 42-7-5 when they score first. They're 31-2-3 if they lead after the first period. And I mean, it tapers off from there. That first period isn't their highest scoring period, but it's the period where they give up the fewest goals. So if they can get a jump on teams, just like in last year's playoffs, that first game against Nashville last year, they scored 5 in the first period, and it was like, this is just fold up this series, So it's kind of like that is such a huge key for them that, people can talk about the scores and stuff. They got to get going from the start or else they're in trouble. And it's just because, the last 2 years have shown the second and third periods are pretty much an even Steven wash for them against anybody. But if they get out to a hot start, they're pretty hard to stop.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, especially against a team like Seattle, right? And Adam mentioned that they've got some players on this team with playoff experience, but never as a group, a collective, have they had to face adversity of being down in a series or being down in a huge lead. So you're right. If Colorado can put the pedal to the metal to start things quickly, it might be a little more tricky for Seattle to kind of fight back there. Adam, what about you? Is there a key to success, you think, for the Kraken to win their first playoff round as a franchise?
It's just scoring by committee. They got to keep doing what they're doing. Like you look at their team. So McCann has generally played on the second and third line. He's got 70 points. Matty Beniers has played on the first or second line. He's got 57. Then you have Yanni Gourde, who's a bottom 6 forward at 48 points. Daniel Sprong, bottom 6 forward at 46 points. So they've really balanced out how they've been able to score. One thing that I do want to see is more offense from the blue line. That I feel like could be a very key factor in how they run this series. But the Kraken, I feel like, while they may not have the high-end talent that the Colorado Avalanche have, I feel like they're a more balanced team than generally the Colorado Avalanche have. So, like, you look at it, to me, the major factor in the series is that Colorado is not going to have Nazem Kadri. Like, I think that is massive. And you look at the Kraken and their responses, well, we have Matty Beniers, Alex Wenberg, Yanni Gourde, and then throw in Morgan Geekie on the fourth line. So that is a pretty good top 4 depth at the center position. And I feel like that might be stronger than what Colorado necessarily has this year. Like I said, the Kraken do not have the high-end talent of a McKinnon, a Makar, a Rantanen. But they have these players where it's like, even if the fourth line is out there, you think that they're going to score. Brandon Tanev produced 16 goals and 35 points this year in 82 games. So, like, you just look throughout this lineup and there's just everybody seems to be a major factor in the end.
So that's going to lead me to a good question and a nice transition for you, Kerry, because the next segment is the worries or concerns or things that you're sort of watching here. And Adam brings up the point that there's no Nazem Kadri in Colorado anymore, but JT Compher has stepped up kind of in that role and played pretty well. Does he eliminate that worry for you? Do you think that's still the biggest concern in Colorado, is that lack of depth at center and not having a guy like Kadri in the lineup? What is it that you're looking at that you're like, man, this might be a concern for Colorado?
Yeah, and I mean, that was like a major talking point pretty much as soon as like they shut off the lights from them carrying the cup around the rink. It was, who the heck is going to be the second line center for them next year? And they've done it sort of through the aggregate. Yeah, I mean, Compher's been great. They brought in like Lars Eller and stuff, but that can't just be a one guy thing. I mean, to the same point that Adam said, Seattle needs to succeed through this depth. They got to figure out that when McKinnon and that top line isn't on the ice, they got to figure that out. It's got to be multiple people. I mean, Alex Newhook has to step up. Compher has to step up. Eller has to step up, and I mean, depth, when we talked about, what are the concerns going in? Depth was one of them at that position in particular. but also in the back. I mean, you got to get Makar back, but getting Makar back is one thing. He's got to be Cale Makar, though. You know, like you can't just throw a number 8 jersey on. Oh, everything's going to be great. It's going to be interesting to see where he's at. You know, day to day doesn't mean anything when it's the playoffs. So it's like, where's he really at? You know, but because the depth at the defense, I mean, you're looking at Devin Taves, Sam Girard on the top pairing, which is okay. But then you're looking at Jack Johnson on the second pairing, Curtis McDermott. And I mean, the more Makar there is, that's less minutes that, you know, people don't have to worry about, oh gosh, what's Curtis McDermott going to do? I mean, I'd say he's a parking cone, but that's like mean to parking cones. I mean, he's just been brutal this year. And it's just like, you can't have that guy out there for an extended amount of time, or guys like that, and that depth at the defense. I mean, that's a major concern, especially if Makar ends up missing a game here and there, if he's not the same when he comes back. And then the other thing for them is they got to stay out of the penalty box. I mean, they are bottom 15. I think they were 17th or 18th in the penalty kill this year. That's part. I mean, they don't have Andrew Cogliano out there on the penalty kill. That might not be the biggest name, but that's a huge player for them in the special teams. You know, Josh Manson's been out forever. Cale Makar's like a question mark. So it's the penalty kill. They got to stay out of the box, and they got to get somebody to step up for that depth at second line center, which we've talked about all year. And then same thing with the defense. They gotta have those guys back, because it just drops off so fast when some of those guys are out at the top.
I was just going to ask you, for folks that don't watch Colorado Avalanche as closely as you do, what's the status of Josh Manson? Is he out for the series?
Yeah, they keep saying the last thing that I heard was he's just kind of, I mean, he's only played in a couple dozen games this year. I mean, from the injury standpoint with Josh Manson, it's just, they hoped he would be back by now. I mean, it was a lower body thing, but you still don't hear anything. You know, sometimes he skates, sometimes he doesn't. Is he going to be back? And if he comes back, it's the same thing I just mentioned about Makar. Is he going to be Josh Manson, or is he going to be 60% or 80%? And is that enough against a team with this much depth that, you know, it's a tough one. I mean, Manson was a big part last year, and it's a guy that they need to have back, but it just is so much more minutes for guys like Girard, Taves, and Makar if, you know, those other dudes aren't picking up the slack, even if they're only asked to play 10 minutes a game. There's still a liability out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's certainly a fatigue factor that could go along with some of the players in Colorado. Adam, what about you? You mentioned the depth, and it seemed to be that you were hinting that it might not be as huge a concern as not having that top end talent because they have so much depth. Is that a worry? Is there other things that you're kind of worried about, whether it's the inexperience of the team or what have you, something that you're focused in on that you're like, this could be problematic for Seattle?
It's the goaltending. This team is one of the best defensively structured teams in the entire NHL, yet they can't get the goaltenders to make on a regular basis 20 to 25 saves a night. It's a struggle to get the goaltending above 900 for the season. Like that is the reason that they're in the wild card and not at the top of the Pacific Division, is their goaltending. So we'll see what happens. You know, Martin Jones, Philip Grubauer, they both have experience in the playoffs. But if they can't, it's just kind of like frustrating, because you look at this team and you look at it like, this team is built for the playoffs. Like everything that they have done, they have built for the playoffs, and they look like a really good playoff team. And then you're like, but they could allow 24 shots and lose the game 4-1. So it's just kind of like frustrating at this point. Like I said, Grubauer has played well against the Colorado Avalanche this year, but like overall, it's just been, you can't rely on a 3-game sample against one team to determine a playoff when you have a 40-game sample or 82-game sample to look at, and they just can't produce against everybody else. So if Grubauer can perform like his contract expects him to, that will be a major play in this series. And as we know, the Kraken can score 9 goals. They can score 8 goals. Like, they can get into these run and gun games, but I would be a little bit concerned if they do try to go that route, if they do try to say, listen, if McKinnon and Makar put up 5 points combined, we're going to score 6 goals type thing. I would be very concerned if that's their theory. I would expect them to say, we're going to just try to shut everybody down and hope that the goaltending can find a way to bounce back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of strategy Seattle employs here. If they try to go run and gun, or they try to do it by committee and shut everybody down, and see how well that works, and whether they stick to it or not if it pounds out in the first couple of games. This is a fun one for me. I like doing this with everybody that we're talking to. It's a bold and a not so bold prediction. Kerry, I'll start with you. So basically, bold means you're kind of going to go out on a limb here. You're going to talk about something that maybe not everybody's watching, a prediction or something that isn't as obvious. And then the not so bold one is probably something we all know and is pretty obvious, but we're watching for it anyway. So what would your bold and not so bold prediction for Colorado be?
My bold prediction is, I'm going back to what I mentioned earlier about Devin Taves. I mean, I think depending on Makar coming back, even if Makar comes back, it opens so much. He is so much better with that guy on the ice next to him, which is that is not so bold. But when I think Devin Taves is in a position where he has run the show so much this year that I think he can kind of, be the guy that they roll out there for 28.5 minutes, and he can take over a series. I mean, he's a guy that they've leaned on. I think he's a guy he's proved they can lean on him on the power with, running the point on the power play too. So my thing is I think Devin Taves, if given the chance, is Makar or not, I think he's in for a big series, and I think they need him because I think scoring might be at a premium if this year's regular season series was any indication. So I just think he's in for a big playoffs, and I think he's in for a big series against these guys because they're going to need some offense from the back too.
And a not so bold, something that's pretty obvious that we should expect to see out of Colorado?
My not so bold prediction was I think McKinnon and Ranton get out of their funk, against that they've had against Seattle. They've held them down, this year, but gosh, since April, I mean, they have just been on a tear. I mean, Colorado went 7-0-1 in their 8 games in April, and I think Rantanen had 7 goals and 10 assists, and McKinnon had 4 multi-goal games. So they are clicking right now. And and when they're clicking like that, it is a blast to watch. I mean, unless you're wearing a jersey from the other team, but like the famous Alex Pietrangelo, when McKinnon's coming barreling down at the ice, oh boy. But it, when they get in that tear, I mean, it just feels like they're playing on fast forward, and that's the way McKinnon and Rantanen are clicking right now. So my not so bold prediction was, I think in these, they scored 1 goal combined in the 3 games during the regular season. I would wager that when going into game 4, they probably have more than 1 point.
I'm going to say that's a pretty safe bet. Yeah, I'm thinking that too. Adam, what about you? You got a bold prediction and a not so bold prediction for the Kraken?
So my bold prediction will be that Matty Beniers is going to be able to shut down Nathan McKinnon in this series. I feel like when we look at if the Kraken win this series, Matty Beniers will have more points than Nathan McKinnon. I feel like that's really the way it has to go. Matty Beniers has been incredible. He in only 2 penalty minutes in 80 games this year. So he's not costing his team. He's developing into that elite 2-way center that Seattle really saw when they drafted him. So my bold prediction is that if the Kraken are going to win, Matty Beniers will have more points in the series than Nathan McKinnon will.
And what about something really obvious, something that's kind of this is what we should expect to see out of Seattle?
So my not so bold prediction is not an on ice prediction, but that everybody in that Climate Pledge arena will have some sort of hearing loss after game 3. Having gone to Seahawks games where it is an outdoor arena and you can't hear the person standing next to you when they're trying to have a conversation with you, I am so excited to hear and see what those Seattle Kraken fans can do in the playoffs. I've been down to Climate Pledge. I've seen a game. It is an unbelievable atmosphere. And the arena is just so cool because it's underground. it's just, I am so excited for the people of Seattle to finally get this opportunity to watch a playoff game at the NHL level. And I think that they are going to cause some issues for the players on the ice, because communication is going to be very difficult when the players are trying to talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see. I'm with you. I think it's going to be a massive part of this series, that home crowd game in Seattle. But I'm not 100% sure which way it's going to lean. You'd think naturally it would lean towards Seattle and be beneficial there. But I wonder if it'll put any pressure on the Kraken or anything like that. It's always interesting to see how these crowds affect the games and things like that. Kerry, we got 2 more segments here. Let's go to an MVP. Now, you can pick somebody from Colorado if you want to. You can pick somebody from Seattle if you'd like. But who do you think the MVP of this series is going to be?
Oh, I'm with Adam. If Seattle wins this series, it's got to be Beniers. I mean, it's got to be. If it isn't, then, I mean, I'd be shocked, just because I think they need that from him. But I think my MVP for this series is going to be Alexander Georgiev. I mean, the goalie for Colorado. You look at these tight games, Kemper made such a huge difference for them last year in those close games. And I feel like there's going to be a number of close games in this series, whether it goes 4 games or whether it goes 7 games. And he's got to be the guy that, tips those scales a little bit. Now, he's been really, really good for him this year. I mean, he's got 5 shutouts. He's in the top 10 in pretty much every meaningful category for goaltenders. And he's another guy that nobody's really talked about, just because you're talking about, oh, geez, when's Nichushkin getting back? Is Landeskog coming back? Everybody's just been constantly talking about who's been off the ice, and this is a guy that's been on the ice. It's been great for him. And I just think in this series, with how low scoring these teams have been, particularly this season, but really against each other all time. I mean, I think that's a guy that can really step up and put his stamp. Even though this is his first playoffs, he's got a pretty good group in front of him, to be able to do it.
Well, and when you talk about the fact that these 2 teams have been separated by a goal in all the games that they've played, that really equates to a save. So if you can get that save, if you can be the goaltender that makes you that save, you've got a pretty good nod for being the possible MVP here. What about you, Adam? You'd mentioned Beniers and his importance. You've mentioned Grubauer and his importance. Are one of those 2 guys your MVP for the series, or do you have somebody else?
So for me, if the MVP for the Kraken is going to be Jordan Eberle. Even though Beniers is going to have to lead the team in scoring, Jordan Eberle, a big game player, as you know from his time in Edmonton and with the World Junior team, this guy shows up in big games. He has the experience playing with the New York Islanders for those years, that playoff experience. So I feel like Jordan Eberle, if the Kraken are going to win, Matty Beniers will lead the team in points, but Jordan Eberle will be that team MVP. And then looking at Colorado, if we're going to name an MVP, I think it's just got to be Rantanen, because it's just he scored over 50 goals this year. I think that as good as McKinnon is, as good as Makar is, Rantanen is that kind of player that really stirs that drink in Colorado. He's that player that doesn't get talked about a lot, kind of flies under the radar because McKinnon and Makar are there. And I feel like he sometimes gets forgotten. Like, we watch these plays where the whole defense goes to McKinnon and Makar is left wide open at the side of the net. So I think that he is going to have a massive series for the Colorado Avalanche, especially as you mentioned, with who knows what's going to happen with Makar. So that will be the Colorado Avalanche MVP, in my opinion.
No,
I mean, that's to piggyback on that. I mean, Rantanen's led him in scoring each of the last 2 years. It took 111 points for McKinnon to pass him this year. So people around here love Mikko Rantanen, but I agree with you. When I mention that to other people, they're like, what? It's got to be McKinnon, right? So yeah, definitely an underrated superstar, but he's starting to turn a lot more heads.
Yeah, no, he had a fantastic season. I like both of those picks, actually. Okay, let's prediction. Let's do prediction time here. Let's go with Kerry first. Who do you think wins the series, and in how many games?
I think the Avalanche win, but I don't think it's going to be like last year, where they wiped the Predators off the face of the earth. I would be shocked if this is a 4 or 5 game series. I think with how close they are. I think the Avalanche win, but I bet it takes them 6, which might sound surprising considering they're the division winner and one of the top seeds out of the West. But it's how these two teams have played against each other. And I mean, you look at a guy like Grubauer, intimate knowledge of this locker room. I mean, he faced them for years here, every day in practice. So it's kind of it's an interesting dynamic. It's the same dynamic that we had last year with St. Louis and Colorado in the second round. And I mean, it looked like St. Louis was a team that had a shot at beating them, and then their goalie gets hurt, and then other players get hurt and everything. They ended up winning in 6 games, but I think that's what happens here. I think Colorado is probably too much for them, particularly with the experience of last year going into this season, but I don't think it's going to be a sweep or anything. I think Colorado takes it in 6 games.
Adam, what about you? Are you going with Seattle? Are you going with Colorado? And if whatever you pick, how many?
I think that it is going to be the Colorado Avalanche, but I do think that this series is going to be pushed to 7 just because, as you mentioned, we don't know what's going on with Cale Makar and with everything that goes on around there. But I do think that this is going to be a mostly I think that each team is going to win a home game, but I think that the rest of them is going to be the way team wins, because you look at it. So the Seattle Kraken, they won 26 games on the road, 20 at home. The Colorado Avalanche, 29 wins on the road, 22 at home. So I'm sensing this little pattern that I feel like we're going to see Colorado win 3 on the road, Seattle win 2 on the road, and then each team takes home one home game. And I think that will be game 1 and game 3 that we'll see the home wins for Colorado and Seattle. But I think it will be a major testament to the success that the Seattle Kraken had this year if they can push it to 7. Against a Colorado team that has that high-end skill. But yeah, once it gets to game 7, who knows what happens, really.
Yeah, no, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm going with Colorado as well. I think it's going to be 6. For me, the biggest factors here are no matter what happens with the Seattle Kraken, this season is a win for them, right? If they don't get out of the first round, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but nobody's going to lose any sleep over this. This is a team that's really good. They're ahead of where they should be. And just getting into the playoffs is going to be a huge win for them. I'm also a little concerned about their high shooting percentage. It's really high. And I'm not sure that you can sustain that in the playoffs. And if they don't, I think that could be problematic for them. And I'm just not totally sold on the goaltending. I don't know if Grubauer is going to be able to pull it off. He could, but I'm going with Georgiev on that one. So for me, it's going to be Colorado in 6. But I do think it's going to be a fun series. I am looking forward to, as you mentioned, Adam, the crowd and how much of a factor they are in this series and how Colorado reacts to it. But I'm going with the Avalanche in 6. Thanks, guys. Kerry, Adam, I appreciate this. For all of those of you that are watching this and you want to put your predictions in at the bottom of the YouTube page, please do that. Put your comments in. Let us know who you think is going to win it and in how many games as well. You can check out Kerry and Adam's work at the Hockey Raiders. Check out all their articles. I'm sure they're going to have lots of content as these two teams battle each other in the first round. And then whichever one of your teams make it through here the first round, hopefully we'll get a chance to have you guys back in the second round as we visit who they're going to be facing next. So Kerry, Adam, thank you very much. I appreciate you doing this first round preview with us. For everybody else, check out the other videos on the YouTube channel and share these with your friends. We appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon.